His father was a very famous ESPN broadcaster, but his son, Mike Golic Jr., is possibly more famous than your dad right now, taking over the airwaves. You got a new show on ESPN radio. You are on TV. You're doing calls from the booth. What's up, Mike? How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Courtney. Yeah, it's gotten busy in all the good ways. I tell everyone after 4 months of trying to do a radio show with no sports, I will take the version of life right now that leaves me with a lot less free time, but a lot more fun and a lot more to watch.
I asked you when we first got on the StreamYard, I was like, are you in like Alabama or something? Arkansas State? He's like, no, you were broadcasting out of a remote booth. That's something COVID different that, I don't know, worries me. Hope that it doesn't stay. We like to be, reporters that are on the road. How was that experience last night?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. And like you said, a lot of people have had to make this adjustment. I remember talking to Adam Amin, who used to be my colleague here at ESPN, is now calling games over at Fox. And he was one of the first guys I knew that had gotten into the remote booth setup like we have now. And it's super interesting. Like you said, we all love being out at live events. I think that's why we get into covering sports, is you want to stay close to the actual game action. But in lieu of that right now, it's really impressive the job that, ESPN and everyone else have done getting these environments in studio as close to the atmosphere as you're going to get, as many looks as you can get at it. So we can still do the job because still someone has to tell the stories of the players that are going out there and trying to play sports in the midst of everything that's going on. And we take that honor pretty seriously. And so it's been a lot of fun still, even if we don't get all the same feels of inside a stadium.
What's better, being, calling a college football game or sitting on a set with your dad? Have to ask the dad questions. Talk about the sign off, everything. Just give me the full game.
Yeah, the sign off is I don't know. That one got a lot more traction than I expect because that's not what we went into that moment. Like, it was a really emotional time for everyone in my family, and it was just one of those things that, like you said, getting to sit on set with my dad's going to be the highlight of my professional career. I won't ever top that. Like, getting to do a show with him for almost 3 years, the way that we did on Golic and Wingo is going to be the highlight, because it was something we always knew might have been a possibility, but you never know. Dad spent 20 years as one of the premier shows and one of the premier broadcasters in radio, in sports media, and I was just getting started. So I was fortunate that they felt like bringing me along for the ride. But just, in the interest of that moment, giving people flowers while they can still smell them kind of thing. Like, our family is always lived a really public life because of what his radio show was. It was a family show first. And so to get to finish it off with our whole family on set there, and to get to tell Dad, all of the things that he showed us during his time, maybe without even knowing it, just because of where his priorities are and the kind of man he is. It was a cool moment. And then to hear from people after the fact, family members that watched that show that said, I watched that last episode with my son or with my daughter or with my dad or with my mom, and had it resonate the way that it does when a show is about family was a cool byproduct that I didn't really see coming.
You talked about it. You've only been in this industry. You have the gift of the gab. Okay. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I can remember, I completely forgot that you were a Notre Dame football player. And obviously, after the football career ends and you decide to step into media, you have the best role model and leader right in front of you. What was the biggest piece of advice that he gave you? And what is something that you continually try to improve on as a broadcaster? I'm not going to call you a rookie broadcaster.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's kind of like in the NFL, where you got to get 4 games into your second season before you're officially not a rookie. I think now at this point, 5 years in, I finally feel less like a rookie, but I still don't feel by any means like a vet in all of this. So holding down that middle ground. But Dad's advice, as corny as this is going to sound, his day one advice was always just be yourself. Especially, and this, whether it's radio, podcasting, it's too long form of a medium for you to try and keep up an act. That's for people a lot smarter than me. As my dad would say, you're not smart enough to be somebody else, so be yourself. But that's what people come for in a lot of this. The information being great and being prepared in that way is always the foundation. And that's what I saw. That's never what I heard from Dad. Is I just watched the way he worked and prepared. I saw the way that he was so diligent about making sure he was going to have the facts there. He was going to have the support he needed for whatever he was saying, but he was going to bring it to the table in the way that was most uniquely and authentically him. And that's what I watched people, eat up for 20 years as he was there on the, everyone's morning on sports talk, whether it was Mike and Mike or Golic and Wingo, is it was the way he delivered it. So that's what I still try and go to now, is just as you go through, because you see so many people do things well, and we've got so many talented people in this industry, you can get caught up in trying to match what someone else is doing instead of just doing the best version of what you do. And I think I catch myself trying to center back on that, because it's simple advice, but it's always been the most effective.
It's beautiful. And I love that. And I know that there's so many kids that are looking up to you. And there was actually just an article that someone in one of the local newspapers wrote about me. And I had kind of just written down certain things about giving back to the next generation and my pieces of advice about networking and don't be afraid. I mean, that's my personality. I mean, I'm fire. I go after it. I won't be denied. I bang down those doors. But really, I think that giving back to the next generation of broadcasters, I mean, you personify it. And I think it's so beautiful. I love how you call him Dad. He's not my Golic. He's Dad,
Well, and you know
really
what?
endearing.
That was a funny thing, is early on when we started working together, there were conversations about that. Like, hey, should you call him Mike on air? Like, would it be more professional? And I was like, listen, like, you guys can take me off the show if you want to. Like, I'm going to call my dad Dad. Like, it would be so weird and forced doing it the other way. And just being upfront about that. Like you said, this is about transparency. And this is about, if we're going to be a father and son on air, why don't we be a father and son on air? Yeah. So
dogs included in between the legs and the kicks, I died over this one story, and I can't remember if I saw, no, it definitely was recorded. You definitely posted on your Instagram. Listen, when Dad works in the workplace, there's going to be some, some embarrassing stories that come through the airwaves. And there was one about you watching porn and him calling you out in the worst way. Can you just retell that story? It was in front of your sister. How am I going to tell your 12-year-old sister that you're watching naked girls? Like, I tell that story again, please.
Courtney, so it was like one of his most proud dad moments looking back on it, because he dealt with something that every parent deals with at some point, like their son's finding that section, their daughter finding that section of the internet. And I blame my brother first and foremost, because my brother's failure to just simply close out of the browser was such a level of hubris that I can't possibly fathom. But so that gets found out on the computer. And so my dad brings us down into the basement and he sits us down. And when my dad gets mad, he never raised a hand at us, but he grows. He's like a 10-foot tall grizzly bear at that point, especially when we're 12 and 13. And he sits down there and he's reading us the riot act in the basement. And all of a sudden he brings my sister down, and she has no idea what's going on. Like, she's sitting there. She's, like you said, she's 10 or 11 or whatever she is at that point. And he just sits there and he points at her and goes, "You want to tell her what you were watching?" And of course, we're not going to sit there and look at my sister and be like, "Yeah, we were watching porn, Sid." And we just sit there in silence, and Dad sends her back upstairs and keeps going. And it's now getting to revisit that all as adults. He's like, "Oh yeah, I knew I had that one in the bag. You guys just sitting there silent." He's like, I was like, "Use my sister as a prop in this. How dare you?" But it was a proud moment for him.
I feel like a rite of passage for every male broadcaster. I don't know, maybe again my mind's in the gutter. I feel like I've just been hearing recently stories about 14-year-old you. Kirk Minahan talks about it. He talked about listening to songs when he, some old song from the 80s came up. He's like, "Yo, I used to love this song, and I used to have dirty thoughts to this song." I don't know. I mean, it makes for great radio. And thank you for telling that story. We're going to get to all the fun stuff, because I mean, first of all, Notre Dame sweatshirt. That's why you're on here. We are here to preview college football. Ooh, college football starting up this weekend. And you are the college football guru. And yes, you played for Notre Dame. So, I mean, they've started off the season well. with a 4-0 record, typically, as unbiased as you can be. How good is Notre Dame going to be this year?
I think they've got the potential to be a great football team. We haven't seen that all realized yet because, like you said, undefeated but largely against inferior competition right now.
Yeah.
Their opponents' record's not great in the early portion of this season, but they're veteran in all of the right spots that you need to be in a pandemic season, especially. Like, having a veteran team helps a lot, but in general, this is college football. Talent wills out. But this year, you had a weird, disrupted offseason. You had a different kind of training camp. Even now, the things you're allowed to do and able to do inside a facility are so different than having players that have been around your program for a while, understand the way things need to go, leading the charge is more critical than ever. And so to bring back a quarterback in his third year as a starter in Ian Book, to have an offensive line that returned all 5 starters in one of the best groups in college football, while you figure out, all right, what's going on at wide receiver? How are we replacing the production we lost when Chase Claypool left in the second round of the draft to go to the Steelers? So I think Notre Dame is a very good team right now. I don't think they're as good as they're third ranked in the country at this point as the Big Ten gets ready to kick off. And obviously that'll change with some of the teams entering the fray. But I think they've got the potential to be, again, what they've been in the last 5 years under Brian Kelly, a double-digit win football team every year with a shot, if they put it together in November, of being a team that can go into the playoff and hang with anybody.
It's really curious that you were talking about that. Obviously, COVID shorted season, differing schedules. That the Big Ten starting up this weekend. There's a balance of skills. Being that you are kind of in the know on the other side of things, have you talked to anyone in the selection committee about how they're going to be judging the college football playoff this year, just given that the SEC and Big Ten have such different schedules?
You know what? We haven't gotten a clear answer, which is actually par for the course for the selection committee, because the one thing that's happened is as they set out and they list us all the criteria of things they'll consider, strength of schedule, common opponent, out of conference, conference championships. It's never a defined rubric. It's always drawn up. And with the committee changing members every year, we know certain members graduate out. They bring new ones in. It's always been drawn up in the dirt on this. And we talk to Heather Dinich all the time, who does such a great job, not only reporting on all of college football, but she's, basically got her ear to the door of that committee room during most seasons. And I think now the job gets more difficult because you're not going to have any of those out of conference matchups to test opponents in a lot of this when it comes to the Power Fives. And so I think it's going to be more eye test based than ever. I think doing what Alabama did, and this is the unfortunate part of preseason rankings, like Alabama doing what it did to Georgia happens in part because the rankings and the polls thought highly of those teams going in. So you're going to say, all right, we got a big ranked win. Georgia barely drops in the polls after Alabama hangs 40 on them. If you're trying to, maybe as a team in the Big Ten outside of the top 10 right now, if you're Michigan, who thinks, all right, we finally found our quarterback of the future in Joe Milton, but you're not like, Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State getting that respect right out of the gate, maybe it's a little harder to climb up if you don't have that initial poll respect that's going to help put you in position. That's the part I'm not sure of yet.
Yeah. Going back to the big topic of conversation, at least this past weekend, you mentioned Chase Claypool, breakout superstar rookie. I'm sure you're super proud for the Pittsburgh Steelers. 6 touchdowns the last 2 games. You talk about rookies going into that 2021 draft, and the name Trevor Lawrence, Tank for Trevor, has been coming up a lot recently just because of the New York Jets and how bad they are. And there are a couple of your colleagues, I think, either your colleagues or someone in FS1 was like, if I'm Trevor Lawrence, I'm hanging around Clemson another year because I don't want to go to that Jets team. The Jets could lose, every single game again next year. But if you're Trevor Lawrence, what do you do?
I think you probably end up going. Now, we've seen there's some history, like you can go all the way back to the Eli Manning stuff of trying to use your status to manipulate what goes on in the draft. But ultimately, I think it gets to a point. I think we're at that point with Trevor right now where when he gets done with this year, there's going to be nothing the college game has left to offer him. He's a national champion. What we're seeing right now from him, because he's always had the ungodly ability. He's always had such physical talent. He's unbreakable. After I saw him take that hit in the Fiesta Bowl last year against Ohio State that crumpled him, he ultimately came back onto the field. I knew that guy was built to something different. He's Teflon Trevor as far as I'm concerned. but he's seeing the game like when Neo broke the Matrix. Like it's all zeros and ones for Trevor right now.
I love that. I love that comparison. Who would you compare him to?
So I said, especially what we've seen from Justin Herbert, because Justin Herbert's performed better at the NFL level earlier than I expected that he would. And maybe part of that's the way Oregon and Mario Cristobal wanted to run their offense, but we're just seeing more poise under pressure from Justin Herbert. So I said, take what we've seen from Justin Herbert as an NFL quarterback so far, the stuff people like, strap a Hemi on top of that, and then sprinkle some of the Patrick Mahomes like off-platform magic in there because he's got that ability. Like he's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's the closest thing physically you're going to get because he's able to do that. I'm going to run away from my throwing arm and throw back across my body at full speed. And I'm going to throw it on a frozen rope, and it's going to go exactly where I want it to. And there are only so many human beings that are capable of that walking this earth. There's probably not even, 10 NFL quarterbacks physically that can do the things Trevor can. Maybe that number is even fewer.
Wow. Speaking of high talent college players, Alabama's Jalen Waddle. I almost said Jason Waddle. Could he be the first receiver off the board next year? How good is he?
He's spectacular. I mean, the speed and control of this whole Alabama wide receiver core. I'm a huge Devonta Smith fan in that receiver core as well. John Mechie's come along for them. But I think Waddle's the one that really intrigues everyone just because the speed seems to be there. But they've done such a good job at developing wide receivers, all the different types they've had come through that program. So I think it'll probably be like him. Jamar Chase was the other name that even last year at LSU, when you've got, Justin Jefferson, who ended up being a high pick going to Minnesota, people still looked and said, Jamar Chase looks like he could be wide receiver 1 next year. So I think it's going to come down to those two, and that's like a style preference one. I may side with Jamar Chase in this, but Jalen Waddle is putting on an absolute show so far this year. And listen, having Matt Jones come in and very seamlessly transition certainly helps that, but he has got so much talent across the board, and Waddle's the point of the spear.
I hate to get back and talking about COVID. Every time we talk about COVID on my show, I like turn to my producer. I'm like, can we cut this out? It's boring. Like I'm not a doctor and I'm an epidemiologist or, whatever, but COVID's really run rampant through some of those SEC teams. LSU practically admitted, Coach O was like, yeah, our whole team just got COVID. Nick Saban had a scare last weekend. What's the latest on the virus and college football? Is it really impeding on the season as much as people think from the outside?
Yes, and I think this is one of the things that I look at, and I've seen it, and college football and the media always has this kind of weird antagonistic relationship at times with NFL media. It's one of those things that you just see, but you see a lot of times in college football, they try and say, well, look, college football season's going along. They're showing you can do it, where the NFL, we saw what happened with the Titans. We've seen what's going on with the Las Vegas Raiders right now, having to send home a whole line. The schedule moves. It looks worse with the NFL because, A, you've got a collectively bargained agreement between a players' union and the league that doesn't exist in college. So college, the rules are dictated on a one-way street. And in college, there are so many teams that everything can be true at once. Like some teams can be getting it done and doing very well, and plenty of others. We've seen tons of games postponed. Like you said, the SEC getting hard. Notre Dame had to postpone a game against Wake Forest earlier this season. And so all of that, like, it's all being affected in the exact ways I expected in college football. I expected postponements, cancellations, the difficulties that have come. It's just easier if you want to ignore it in college football because the pool of teams is so much bigger.
Was it Ohio State that with Ryan Day and he made them sign a waiver, and it was like a big red flag with the NCAA, basically forcing these kids to sign their life away because of COVID.
Yeah, so the Buckeye pledge was universally skewered by all of us on the outside because it was one of those things that it wasn't technically a waiver, but it looked and sounded like a waiver. And like, again, like you said before, like a lot of this ends up being boring because it boils down to like weird legalese that we all have to dive into. Yeah. But like liability suits would be really hard to prove in this situation, trying to show, did you get COVID while you were at our facility? Now, some of the contact tracing measures might help, but at the end of the day, yeah, trying to do things like that, again, in college where you don't have a union or a players association, and you're trying to, in that instance, say the quiet thing loud. It's like, hey, we need you guys to shoulder all this burden so the rest of us can keep making all that money. It's never looked clearer than it has this year in college football. And so it's a lot easier for not just like a lot of us in college football media that see it, but the general public to look and say, wait a minute, like we're in the middle of a global pandemic. That smells funny for a bunch of players that aren't getting paid $1 on this.
Yeah. Speaking of Ohio State, let's start our Big Ten football conversation right there. They are leaps and bounds ahead of everyone in that conference. And sadly, my Maryland Terrapins, we'll get to them in a second. As much as I loved that they jumped from the ACC, they got, $30 more million a year so they can build this ginormous facility. And, that program might be on the up. I mean, going up against a conference against Ohio State, Michigan, Nebraska, it kills. It's a killer every single year. And, that program, Ohio State, is just fantastic year after year. Do you see anybody competing with them, especially at least in the conference?
I would say no. I think early in the season, getting a look at Michigan and Minnesota, who are going to be one of the big games to start off the Big Ten run, is going to be the one to watch, because there are a lot of rumblings around Ann Arbor that Joe Milton is finally the guy. And he's the first quarterback that Jim Harbaugh has recruited out of high school that started day one for him since he's been at Michigan. So, we're kind of removing every excuse they can have for why that position hasn't worked out the way it's supposed to under Jim Harbaugh. But they lost so much talent elsewhere. Who knows if it's them? If you're Wisconsin, you're replacing Jonathan Taylor's production at running back, which they always seem to find a way to do because Wisconsin's a running back family, but a factory. But, moving on from Jack Cohn at quarterback, it's just like one after another, the NFL portrait of Wisconsin running backs that were all in the same backfield.
Like Iowa is tight end U. I mean, that's just, that's the pedigree.
Notre Dame is tight end U.
Okay.
Iowa's got a couple of really good guys that I like, obviously, but
Kirk Ferentz, you say?
They are a great, listen, Iowa, like you said, you know what? The Big Ten has really great, sure identities. That's why going into most seasons, you can move around a lot of the parts. And that's why it becomes difficult to find someone, like you said, capable of taking down Ohio State. You can find people that can do it as a one-off, Penn State, they'll drop one, like a weird one to Purdue or something every once in a while. But overall, no one recruits the depth of athletic talent at the skill positions the way Ohio State does. The rest of the Big Ten recruits to beat each other. Ohio State recruits to beat Alabama, recruits to beat Clemson, recruits to beat, the national elites. And they get them so consistently that it's kind of that effective. All right, well, as we lose a lot of these great players on the outside, they just restock and reload. And when you bring back, again, this season, head coach and starting quarterback, when they're one as good as Justin Fields and Ryan Day, you're automatically leaps and bounds ahead of the rest who are trying to play catch up and draw that in the dirt with a season that started. And for the Big Ten, remember, more confused than everyone else. Stopped training camp, thought they weren't going to have a season, came back, had to restart. Like, it all got infinitely more difficult.
Fields, that touchdown to interception ratio is pretty crazy. He's got 51 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. It's going to be hard for the Michigan Wolverines to even compete once again this year. It's the long, drawn-out, sad story every single season that they just cannot seem to compete or hang with Ohio State. And that rivalry has gone years and years. And as much as I love Jim Harbaugh and I root for them, and, how much more of a leash does he have?
You know what? He probably should have a lot more of a leash than he's going to be given. And don't get me wrong, like, there's a sick part of me as a Notre Dame fan that's always going to despise Michigan. But again, as I look at it from the broadcast sense, Jim Harbaugh winning double-digit games more often than not in his tenure here. I mean, coming out of the gate smoking with 10 wins, and your only failure being not being able to beat an Ohio State team that's just on one of those runs where they're built different than most of the teams in the country, hardly seems like a reason to say, yeah, we should fire the really good coach. Like, I've been through a coaching change. There are so many parts of it that people miss that suck and are terrible. And while it worked out, like we ended up gelling with Brian Kelly and things started to go well and have continued to go well for the last decade. The transition isn't easy and you're never guaranteed what comes out the other side. Even for a place like Michigan that's always going to be able to get the highest level of coaches because it's still a blue chip job. Like I never make those decisions lightly. And so if you're Michigan, you've got to, unfortunately, one of the difficult things in college football is to have an honest assessment of yourself and say, all right, with what we're accomplishing, do we really think this coach is the one thing separating us and the level of talent we're bringing in from what we think we should be?
Well, really, it's a recruiting issue. And I know that for years, the University of Maryland, they couldn't keep guys from PG County, which had, outside of Florida, had probably one of the highest percentage of Division I athletes. They couldn't keep them there because they had no pull with the athletic department, and there was that whole ordeal. But yeah, you talked about it. You hit on it. It takes a while to bring continuity in there, to develop players. How long does it take to build a program up? I would say it takes about 3 years to get linemen ready. And that's Maryland's biggest weakness.
Yeah, and Maryland, I mean, listen, their choice, like Mike Locksley and his head coaching record, quite frankly, aren't stellar. Like, I mean, what we've seen from him in the past, he got some of that shine by going to Alabama boot camp. But like, I don't know, I look at this situation and I say with them, it's a little bit different because I'm not sure Mike Locksley is the guy for the job in that instance. But Maryland's got a tough job. Like, again, you start just glomming onto a big conference like the Big Ten because it seems like a good idea, and then you run into the problems that they have versus Michigan. Like, they've established a program. Jim Harbaugh is one of the best coaches in all of football, period, at jump-starting a program. Like, it does not take him long to turn things around. I watched firsthand when I was at Notre Dame what he did at Stanford. They went from being 1-11 to being one of the powerhouses in college football that's still going on now because of what he did and because of what he knows how to do, whether it's there, the Niners, or now at Michigan. So they're set as far as I'm concerned in building a program. It's just going through that upper crust. Like it's being, to use a basketball analogy, it's being the Raptors in the Eastern Conference when LeBron is there. Like, are you really a bad team if your only crime is not being able to beat one of the best that's ever played? If you're Michigan, you had to sit there under the umbrella of Urban Meyer for years, who's one of the best, regardless of the impropriety, one of the best college football coaches to ever stand on the sideline. And now, all right, he handed the program off to a guy that is going to maybe be an NFL head coach someday, has that background, and still has all that same talent you were bringing in. Like, that's not the biggest crime in the world. But when you see yourselves in your own head as eye to eye with Ohio State, it becomes difficult to stomach even this level of success. I mean, we see Saban run coaches out of the SEC like this all the time for this reason.
Yeah. Well, I do know that Maryland, they recruited Tua Tagovailoa's brother. What do you think about their squad this year? I mean, just give me some hope. Just please. Does Maryland have a chance ever? That was also one of my next questions too. I don't think Locksley is the guy for them. I just think, I know he's taken a big stance internally and, promoting social justice and having a big voice in that sense. But I mean, outside of the, the intangibles and things that you can say with your mouth, I just don't think he's getting it done on the field. But, talent wise, what do you think about this Maryland squad?
Well, I mean, remember, like, we're not that far removed last year from like the first 2 weeks of the season where we all thought Maryland was back and they're scoring like 66 points a game. Like, listen, at this point, I think there's unfortunately still a talent dearth that doesn't allow them to compete in the Big Ten right now, especially when you're kind of trying to be counter programming in a conference that's got a pretty strong identity of, hey, we're built in the trenches. We live a certain way, like the Wisconsins and Iowas that we were just talking about. So, no, I think it's a difficult spot. And like you mentioned, like at some point, you hear the phrase all the time, you are what your record says you are. Like, he was a 2-26 coach when he was 2-26 coach when he was at New Mexico. Like, I don't know what part of that screams lofty expectations for anybody who brings him on board.
Oh, you said it right there. First of all, everyone, oh my God, Maryland's back. I get that text every single year, like clockwork, in September. Have you seen how they blew them out? 59-0, or they scored 72-0, and 72 was the number of that, that poor player that passed away. But it's every single year. And then they crap themselves when they hit the conference schedule. I'm not convinced otherwise. So Who is your one team to beat and the one team that's going to surprise everyone in just general college football? Before we get into the personal questions,
in just in just general college football, I mean, Clemson is so overwhelmingly the team to beat because in addition to the Trevor Lawrence conversation we had before, Travis Etienne in his backfield has kind of taken that next step in the last really, I'd say half of last year and into this year of being a dynamic pass catcher in all the ways you got to be in modern football. So I think Clemson, and then, I mean, God, the five-star freak show freshman defensive talent they trot in on the line for the best defensive coordinator in college football to just go to work with every year is nauseating. So Clemson's the team to beat in that one. I'd say the one I'm most excited to see is probably going to be what Minnesota can do. I don't think they're on the team. You know what? I guess I should probably limit it to the teams that can actually win at the top level. And I'd probably say in that regard, it's still Florida. Like, I think what Florida's done offensively has been such a marked step forward for them. I understand setback, the loss to Texas A&M, and now everything going on with COVID. But when Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts are on the field together, that's a combination that's as lethal as any in college football. And they were a team that coming into this year, I think they were preseason number 5, even when everybody was ranked in a lot of this. And they're one I'm still very interested to see if they can right the ship as far as what COVID's doing to their season. Can they come back in time to snake bite anybody along this process as we get further down the SEC schedule?
We're talking to Mike Golic Jr. of ESPN. You are an on-air personality. You are a college football know-it-all. You love donuts and food and, binge eating late and, and dating and sneakers and puppies. And where do we start? What's your favorite cheat meal?
My favorite cheat meal is during quarantine. It's been, I went through a couple of stints of
Banana bread?
I go through a fair amount of banana bread, but that was more when I was living at home. Shout out to Mom when I first got back and got into this and was bunking up with Mom and Dad. But I've been going through pints of ice cream like it's going out of style during quarantine. I think I had a stretch where I did 12 pints in 11 days or something like that. I truly don't know. Like, I was sitting around with the shakes. It was coffee and ice cream to start more or less every day. So the fact that I've survived this in one piece and I'm not type 2 diabetic yet is an act of God.
Are you big on minimizing? Could you go like the soy or the oat milk ice cream? Could you do like the Yasso bar? It's got 100 calories. Or you just go, it's no diet food. You're just like a man's man.
Listen, you know what? Like, I live right in a lot of other portions of my life when it comes to eating and trying to do right. When I come to sin, I come to sin. So when I go like my least favorite thing in the world is going to a movie theater and seeing the calories listed on the meals of the movie theater. I didn't come here for you to try and tell me about how bad I'm being in my body. I know when I walk in the door, I came here to do bad things. So don't try and throw it in my face. Not here, not in this setting. If I want that, I will go to some green eats place. I'll go to a salad bar and I'll live right over there. I came here to sin.
Make it rain, bunch of crunch.
Exactly.
Because then sometimes like when you get challenged, you're like, I'm going to eat healthy. And then it gets shoved in your face. You're just like, no, I'm going to be real bad today. Get that extra piece of pie. Why not? What's your favorite donut? I mean, like there's a donut shop I was thinking about it, but then I was like, I just can't walk into this. They have these donuts that are like this big and it's the old fashioned glaze. Kind of like the glazed stick from Dunkin' Donuts with the tough outside. I just think that those donuts are like leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else. And trust me, I'm the biggest foodie. We can go tit for tat on this.
Yeah, you know what? Donut shout out here. Donut Crazy West Hartford, right about 100 yards from my house. I go over there almost every day for something in some way, shape, or form, whether it's coffee, a sandwich, or the donuts there. And they got one of my favorites. It's called the Cookie Monster. It's even like a blue dough for the donuts. It's a glaze on the outside, and then there's a ball of cookie dough dropped in the middle of the circle right there. It is an absolute delight. They are incredible. At Donut Crazy CT on Instagram. Free pub.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sometimes when I drive to New York, I drive through New Haven. Pizza.
They have one. There is one in New Haven also. There is one in New Haven down south. So you're good on it down there. They are one in West Hartford and one in New Haven.
Mystic Pizza, or is it any one of those, what is it, Frank Pepe's, all the good pizza shops in New Haven? Is it like which one?
So I go and shout out to ESPN's own Mina Kimes, Yale alum, who is a vet of the New Haven area. I hit up this place called Bar Pizza a lot down there. Same thing, that New Haven white pizza that everyone goes gaga for.
Oh,
I
yeah,
have
yeah.
never actually been to Mystic Pizza. That is a fun fact. I've lived in Connecticut for over 2 decades and have not been to Mystic Pizza. Love Frank Pepe's though, but a big shout out Bar Pizza. Still waiting to check Mystic off the list.
Listen, I think we're just going to keep going down the line of your favorite foods, because you're going to give a shout out to every single person that's just going to be dumping boxes on your door. I don't know. Yeah, so you're not. Isn't it really big? Like clam pizza is big in New Haven. It's
yeah,
like
I don't really
like a clam. I don't. Yeah,
I don't really rock with that one that much. I'm pretty cool with putting just about everything. Like I rock with pineapple on pizza. I know that's weirdly controversial for some people. I'm good. I'm good. Oh yeah, ham throw. Like I'm good with all of that on a pizza, but the clam portion is kind of where I just personally draw the line. That's not a judgment on anybody else. That's just a me thing.
Yeah. Okay. Do you over sensationalize any of your posts on Instagram? Like with these foods, you're like, oh, I ate the whole cake. I ate 12 donuts. Are you worried that this is like hurting your swag game with the ladies?
No, I do enough of that with other portions of my life that hurts that. I don't need the food. The food, quite frankly, isn't the issue. And like, that is one of those things, again, I'm a big fan and never let the truth get in the way of a good story. But that being said, food is something I don't got to lie about to kick it. Like I am living my truth in that. It's just the ones that get posted are when I'm doing the fun stuff. Like no one wants to see me eat grilled chicken and, sweet potatoes during the rest of the week. They want to see the donuts and ice cream on the weekend. So I'm just in the business, like you, of giving the people what they want.
Exactly. I and it's funny. You're like, oh, you kick yourself in the foot with the dating stuff. I just, what's like your biggest pet peeve of being a sports personality? For me, I mean, I don't even have time. People are like, oh, you should go on a date with this guy. I'm like, I don't have time for this shit. Like, I just got too much on my mind. And when I finally go on dates with dudes, they are either like, they're just obsessed with sports. And then they ask me questions about sports like the entire time. And I have to say, it's just, it makes me just like not want to socialize with men, who are interested in me. I just don't typically. What's your biggest pet peeve of women these days, I guess? After like your exact demographic, I just killed all the dudes that are like watching this. They're like, hey, she's cute. No.
I can say it's good putting out there. Like, don't talk to her about sports. Like she does that when she's on the clock.
Please, for the love of God. Oh my God, you work in sports, blah, blah. Oh yeah, no, that's cool. And I'm like, what do you think about, I heard Stephon Gilmore's on the trade block with the Patriots. Like, what do you think about the offense? I'm like, dude, I do this like 18 hours of my day. Like, please give me free space.
That's why I always tell people we take during the week. When I get to the weekend, I don't need to sit around with strong opinions about that stuff. I'm going to have a few beers, watch the games I want to watch, and then like live the other parts of my life.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Yeah, no, I'd say that's certainly up there. But like the tough part now is like for me, most of my friends, especially my close friends from college, are all married. They've got kids.
Yeah.
And so that means all their wives, who I'm super close with, all got friends that they try and set me up with. And it's very well intentioned and all that, but it's a lot of pressure because it's like, all right, if I go out with this person now and it doesn't work or I don't like them, now I've made it awkward for you. And I don't want that kind of pressure of like ruining a relationship that you thought enough of to send my way. So those are the weird mental hurdles that come now with everybody. And like everyone's super nice. Like you got friends that want to set you up with people because they care about you and they want us to be happy. But it's also like, you know what? Maybe just like not right, not today.
Yeah. Ain't nobody got time for that. My friend tried to do that to me recently. She's like, "Oh my God, did you talk to him? Did you talk to him?" Because they were like trying to send me. So then I have her mom texting me, her texting me. So what's the latest? And I'm like, please, no. But anyways, yeah, dating life is difficult these days. The last thing that I want to ask you about is like your sneaker collection. You might be like professional on the top pants, but it's kicks constantly. Is that your biggest money pit?
Oh, by far. It was one of those things because I never really was into them when I was younger because for me, like, I was fortunate. My dad made a comfortable living, but I didn't want to like spend boatloads of his money on stuff. And so I never really had that vice. But then all of a sudden I get out, I start making my own money. And you mentioned like professional up top. I appreciate that. I am simple up top. Like I don't know how to dress myself overly well. I don't claim to have a lot of style, but I can control the ankle down. And what I figured out is I know what I like. And so now that I've got like I don't have disposable, income that I'm spending on kids or like anything crazy like that. Like I just have this one thing. I have to feed myself, get myself to work every day, and then I've got a bunch of money left over to spend on shoes. And so I have explored that side of me, and it's been a lot of fun because man, you don't need to have a cool outfit if you just have like the 5 inches from the ankle down taken care of. Like I get little old ladies that come up to me all the time when I've got like bright colored shoes on that'll stop me and be like, "I love your shoes," and that's all you got to do. Like it's that easy.
I've got cataracts in my eyes, and wow, those really lit up.
It's it. Like you don't need to be a sneakerhead, and just loud colors appeal to everybody. And I figured that out early.
Who was the last question before I let you go? This has been so fun and fantastic. That campus at ESPN in Bristol is very cool, and I heard about the gift cards, the greeting cards in the cafeteria and all that fun stuff, and the coffee machines from Diana Rossini and all that. Who is just the coolest person that you run into? When I worked at NFL Network, it was just like rotating cast of former players. It was like Ike Taylors and Steve Smiths and Deion Sanders. It's like, oh yeah, you just walk past that guy. But I mean, who's the coolest dude that you bump shoulders with every day?
Coolest person I ever bump with every day, and like you said, the rotating cast of people that come through. The coolest person I ever met on campus was Magic Johnson. Like no one has the ability to make you feel cool by just being around them like Magic Johnson was. Like when Magic Johnson walks up and like daps you up and says, "What's up?"
He gave you dap. He hooked it up with the full dap. That's great.
When that happens, you're like, "Oh my God!" Like Magic Johnson just dapped me up and is talking to me right now. Magic Johnson just like he doesn't like walk around. He's like Stephen A. Smith. He swaggers around. He floats almost through the room there. So I think that one for me was like, because like we're around a lot of people all the time in this industry that we cover, that you get to know and have relationships with professionally. That was the one where I was still like a little kid, starstruck of like, oh my God, this person just kind of gave me the time of day in here is sort of insane.
That's so cool. And yeah, by the way, Stephen A. Smith he's a super cool guy to be around too. He's just the realest of the real, what you get on camera. And that's what your dad taught you. And that's how we'll wrap this up. Where can we find you? Give us a plug. How many more games are you doing? Like, just, I don't know, run down the spiel. Give like your press sheet.
Yeah, here's the press sheet. First off, follow me on Twitter at Mike Golic Jr., Instagram at Mike Golic Jr. Check out the radio show, Chennai and Golic Jr., 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio. You can also check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can check me out. What do we got on here?
Cameo? Are you on Cameo? OnlyFans?
Not yet.
Dude, but what is up with that? Jared Carabas was saying something. Who works at Barstool. I had him on as a guest, and he was like. He goes, oh my God, yeah, like we'll give like baseball clips, and he's like, and put it on OnlyFans. I was like, is that the next thing that's going to be happening? Sports anchors going on OnlyFans?
I'll a cart take on OnlyFans, but yeah, I have not yet gotten into the OnlyFans bag, but you also all over the ESPN digital package though. Certainly. Looking forward to that. Rankings reactions on Tuesdays once the college football starts, playoff committee starts ranking stuff with Jason Fitz. And Thursday nights in the booth with Matt Berry on ESPN, calling a lot of great, we've had great Sunbelt action so far. I think we're on the call for South Alabama and Georgia Southern next Thursday. So check that out, 7:30 p.m. Eastern.
Georgia Southern, still the triple option offense?
Yeah. Still got that going on. So good stuff.
Good stuff. All right, Mike, thanks so much for your time. Enjoy your picks this weekend and your donuts.
Thanks, Courtney.